The moment humanity finally snapped did not begin with fire or fleets or fury screamed across the stars. It began with a pause so deep that even the Galactic Council noticed it. The kind of pause that follows centuries of obedience when a species simply stops asking for permission. The council chamber floated in artificial twilight, as it always had. Vast, ancient, deliberately overwhelming, a cathedral of power meant to remind younger civilizations that history belonged to others. Tiers of delegates hovered, slithered, perched, and shimmered in their assigned geometries, beings whose lifespans dwarfed empires. Watching the lone human representative standing on the central dais, no banners, no ceremonial armor, no visible weapons, just a simple, dark uniform and a posture that was no longer deferential. For 312 years humanity had been a junior member of the Galactic Compact, welcomed publicly and constrained privately, praised for adaptability and resilience while quietly exploited for both. Their worlds taxed heavier than older species because humans recovered quickly. Their colonies placed in dangerous border regions because humans were brave and expandable. Their protests acknowledged politely and filed away forever. Whenever a human system burned, it was regrettable. Whenever a human treaty was broken, it was unfortunate. Whenever millions died, it was tragic but necessary for stability. The Council spoke often of balance, of patience, of the long view, words that cost them nothing and cost humanity everything. The man on the dais was named Elias Rowan, though history would later argue whether his name mattered at all. He had been a diplomat once, a believer in process and compromise, trained to smile while being ignored, trained to negotiate losses into acceptable margins, until the Council authorized the sterilization of New Carthage to prevent escalation. 20 billion humans reduced to a silent future, their children never to exist, their culture sealed in museums and data vaults. A surgical solution, the Council called it, clean, humane, necessary. Elias had stood in this same chamber that day and begged, not shouted, not threatened, just begged. And the Council had nodded with ancient sympathy and voted unanimously in favor. That was when something inside humanity fractured, not loudly, not all at once, but like a continental plate slipping beneath another, pressure building invisibly. Humanity did not rebel immediately. They mourned, they rebuilt, they complied, they sent aid to other species, they honored treaties, they even voted in council sessions they knew they would lose, because humans had learned long ago that survival meant endurance. But behind closed doors, behind diplomatic smiles, something else was happening. Shipyards expanded under civilian designations, research initiatives multiplied under benign names, human trade guilds quietly rerouted resources, and human colonies stopped sharing certain data streams. The Council noticed none of it. Why would they? Humanity had always been noisy when angry. Humans protested publicly. They shouted, they argued, they demanded justice. And this time there were no protests, no fiery speeches, no ultimatums, just silence and compliance. The Council mistook exhaustion for acceptance, mistook grief for submission. Ancient minds often struggled to understand how quickly younger species could change, especially ones who had learned war before they learned space. On the day everything ended, the agenda was routine: border tariffs, minor territorial adjustments, a formal censure of humanity for excessive militarization in the Perseus Reach. Elias Rowan listened without interruption as the accusations were read. He did not argue, did not raise his voice. When granted permission to speak, he simply asked a question, his voice calm, measured, almost gentle. He asked whether the Council believed humanity incapable of enforcing its own sovereignty. Amusement rippled through the chamber. Several delegates radiated mild approval at his humility. The presiding entity responded with practiced patience, explaining that enforcement was a responsibility of mature civilizations, that humanity would one day understand. Elias nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a lesson finally learned. Then he placed a small device on the dais. No alarms sounded, no weapons were detected. It was not a bomb, not a virus, not anything the Council defense systems recognized as a threat. He activated it with a simple touch, and across the chamber, holographic projections bloomed into existence. Not propaganda, not emotional pleas, but data, raw and undeniable. Human ship movements across 500 systems, manufacturing outputs that dwarfed Council estimates. Energy signatures from facilities that officially did not exist. The Council shifted uncomfortably as centuries of complacent assumptions began to crack. Elias spoke again, still calm, explaining that humanity had followed every restriction imposed upon them, and in doing so had learned how to operate within them, how to build smaller, faster, quieter, how to innovate under pressure, how to weaponize logistics, how to turn trade routes into supply lines, how to hide strength behind transparency. He explained that humanity had never sought dominance, only dignity, and that dignity had been denied one too many times. The council attempted to interrupt him. Procedural overrides flashed, but the chamber systems did not respond. Human code had been embedded years earlier, innocuous updates, compatibility patches, maintenance assistance freely offered and gratefully accepted. Outside the chamber, across council space, the first disruptions began. Not attacks, not invasions, but silence. Council fleets lost communication with their command nodes. Navigation beacons went dark. Hyperlane stabilizers drifted out of phase. Worlds dependent on council logistics experienced cascading failures. Energy shortages, orbital traffic jams, nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just systems quietly failing in ways that could not be fixed quickly. Humanity had not struck the body, they had severed the nerves. Elias informed the council that this was not a war. Humanity had studied council history carefully, studied how ancient species fought, how they thought in terms of territory and annihilation. Humans had learned a different lesson from their own past. Wars were not won by killing enemies, they were won by making old systems irrelevant. Humanity would not conquer the council, they would outgrow it. He stated that effective immediately. Humanity was withdrawing from all compact obligations, nullifying all treaties imposed under coercion, reclaiming all buffer colonies, and assuming enforcement authority over their own borders. The council reacted with outrage, threats of sanctions, declarations of illegality, warnings of annihilation, and Elias listened patiently, then delivered the final truth. The council no longer possessed the capacity to enforce its will. Their fleets were stranded, their economies dependent on human logistics, their internal communications compromised, and their younger member species already receiving alternative trade offers, protection agreements, and technological aid from human envoys, all without conditions of support. Humanity had not built an empire, they had built an option. As Elias concluded his address, human vessels emerged from hyperspace across key systems, not in aggressive formations but in defensive constellations, massive but restrained, powerful but disciplined, a display not of rage but of resolve. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. Ancient beings, realizing too late that the species they had dismissed as impatient and emotional had learned patience better than any of them, had waited, adapted, and prepared, and now no longer needed permission to exist. Elias Rowan stepped back from the dais, his role complete, security fields finally reactivated, but it no longer mattered. Humanity had already moved on. The council would continue to exist for a time, issuing decrees to empty chambers, voting on measures no one obeyed, until history itself quietly forgot them. And across the stars, a new understanding spread, that humanity did not snap in anger, they snapped in clarity, and once that happened, nothing in the galaxy could put the old order back together. The collapse did not come all at once. Empires rarely notice when the ground beneath them has already given way. The Galactic Council continued issuing proclamations for weeks, confident that authority itself was a weapon, that legality could substitute for power. But across council space, reality began to diverge from decree. Patrol fleets waited for orders that never arrived. Supply convoys stalled at jump points with no clearances. Border worlds accustomed to council arbitration found no one answering their calls. And into that widening silence humanity stepped, not with banners raised but with hands extended. Human envoys arrived on frontier worlds first, worlds long treated as expendable margins, places where council protection had always been theoretical. They brought food shipments, replacement parts, medical teams, and most importantly, functioning relays. No speeches about loyalty, no demands for tribute, just contracts written in clear language, mutual defense, open trade, local autonomy respected. The offer was simple, stability without subjugation, and world after world accepted, not because they loved humanity, but because humanity showed up when the council did not. Within the council chamber, panic crept beneath the rituals. Emergency sessions were called daily. Ancient delegates argued in unfamiliar tones. Some demanded immediate military response, others called for negotiation. A few quietly began transferring assets beyond council jurisdiction. The presiding entity attempted to reassert order, reminding them of precedent, of unity, of the dangers of fragmentation. But precedent had become meaningless. Unity required trust, and trust had been bleeding out for centuries. Attempts to mobilize council fleets ended in humiliation. Ships that could not synchronize navigation systems, crews stranded without updated star charts, maintenance protocols locked behind corrupted access layers. Human interference was subtle and deniable. Nothing overtly hostile, nothing that could justify a full retaliatory strike. It was bureaucratic warfare perfected, the same kind humanity had endured for generations. Turned back, with surgical precision, the council finally summoned Elias Rowan again, demanding explanations, reparations, compliance, but the dais remained empty, the human seat unoccupied for the first time in centuries. A recorded message played instead. Concise, informing the council that all further communication should be directed through the interstellar cooperative network, a new framework open to all species willing to engage as equals. No permanent vetoes, no hereditary authority, decisions weighted by contribution and consent, not age or force. Several delegates scoffed openly. Others listened in silence, recognizing the danger. As weeks turned into months, the younger council species began defecting openly. Entire voting blocks withdrew, citing failure of protection guarantees, economic collapse, and systemic neglect. The council charter did not account for mass withdrawal. It assumed loyalty was immutable, that history itself bound members forever. But humanity had learned that no system survives once participation becomes optional. On the streets of ancient capital worlds, unrest grew. Populations who had never experienced scarcity faced rolling blackouts, food rationing, orbital traffic failures. Their ruling classes demanded action, demanded the council restore order. But the council had never truly governed. It had mediated strength. And now, the strongest logistical network in the galaxy had stepped away. Humanity did not celebrate. There were no victory parades, no declarations of supremacy. Human media framed events as restructuring, stabilization, correction. Internal debates raged across human space about responsibility, about the risk of becoming what they had overthrown. Safeguards were written into every agreement. Term limits, exit clauses, transparency requirements. Humanity distrusted power deeply, especially their own, and that distrust shaped everything they built. On New Carthage, now a silent world, human ships entered orbit for the first time since the sterilization. They did not terraform, did not resettle. They placed memorial beacons across the planet, visible from orbit, a constellation of light marking what had been lost and what had changed. The message broadcast galaxy-wide. No species would ever again be erased quietly. The council attempted one final measure, invoking the ancient continuity protocol, granting emergency authority to a single consolidated command, a relic of wars long past. The vote barely passed, desperation outweighing tradition. A massive fleet was assembled from what remained operational, ordered to reassert control over a key junction system, now under human protection. The move was meant to send a message. Force still mattered. The engagement never happened. As the fleet entered the junction, human ships did not fire. Instead, they disengaged the hyperlane stabilizers, safely but decisively, trapping the fleet in a gravitational eddy. Engines functional, weapons hot, but nowhere to go. No supply lines, no command uplink. Human negotiators hailed them, offering safe withdrawal under new accords, or indefinite isolation under old authority. Within days, the fleet stood down. That moment broke the illusion. Force without logistics, authority without consent, power without relevance. The council had relied on fear and inertia. Humanity had dismantled both, quietly, methodically, without hatred. In the chamber where it had all begun, the presiding entity finally addressed an empty hall. Most seats dark, systems running on emergency power. It spoke of legacy, of civilization, of betrayal. But there was no audience left to persuade. Outside, trade flowed along new routes. Disputes were arbitrated by rotating councils, not ancient elites, and the galaxy kept functioning better than before. History would later argue about whether humanity saved the galaxy or simply replaced one order with another, but no one disputed the central fact. The Galactic Council did not fall to invasion or annihilation. It faded, rendered obsolete by a species that refused to remain small. And in that quiet erasure, the galaxy learned a lesson older than any empire. Power endures only as long as those beneath it believe it must. The galaxy did not become peaceful after the council faded. Stability is never born fully formed. It has to be assembled piece by fragile piece. And humanity discovered quickly that removing an old order created vacuums as dangerous as tyrannies. Regional powers tested boundaries, old rivalries resurfaced, pirate confederations expanded into abandoned corridors, and species long suppressed by council arbitration sought revenge against neighbors who had once voted against them. The age of decrees was over, but the age of responsibility had arrived, and humanity found itself at the center whether it wanted the role or not. Human space buzzed with argument. Assemblies convened endlessly. Networks flooded with debate. Citizens questioned whether intervention contradicted the promise of equality, whether offering protection would inevitably turn into control. Humanity had not forgotten how easily benevolence could become domination. Councils of civilians, veterans, economists, and ethicists clashed over every deployment, every treaty, every request for aid. Decisions took time, sometimes too much time. And in that delay, systems burned. The first true test came in the Karun expanse, where 3 species once held in check by council arbitration descended into open war over resource worlds. Orbital bombardments devastated cities, refugee fleets clogged hyperspace lanes. Pleas for mediation echoed across the cooperative network. Humanity hesitated, haunted by history. Intervention had always been the justification of empires. But non-intervention now meant annihilation. After weeks of debate, a narrow consensus formed. Humanity would intervene, but not alone. A coalition fleet assembled, human vessels forming the logistical spine, but command shared among representatives from 12 species. Rules of engagement publicly broadcast. Objectives limited strictly to ceasefire enforcement and civilian evacuation. No territorial changes allowed. No punitive actions beyond disabling weapons platforms. When the fleet arrived, it did not strike cities. It shut down targeting networks, isolated warships, and inserted mediators under armed escort. The fighting slowed, then stopped. Grudgingly, angrily, but it stopped. The success terrified everyone, including humanity. It proved intervention could work without conquest, but it also proved how much power humanity wielded simply by coordinating others. Whispers spread across the galaxy. Some called humanity guardians, others called them puppeteers. Older species watched carefully, measuring how long restraint would last, how soon the human experiment would rot into another hierarchy. Meanwhile, remnants of the Galactic Council attempted to reinvent themselves, retreating to a handful of fortified systems, declaring continuity governance, claiming legitimacy through history alone. They issued condemnations, labeled the cooperative network an illegal uprising, and quietly courted disgruntled powers, promising restored privilege in exchange for allegiance. Ancient elites rarely surrender quietly, and their resentment fermented into conspiracy. Human intelligence services uncovered the plot slowly. Data anomalies, unusual fleet movements, encrypted transmissions using obsolete council ciphers. The evidence pointed to an attempted counter-restoration, not of the council as it was, but as it wished it had been. Centralized, authoritarian, openly coercive. The temptation to crush it immediately was strong. Humanity remembered New Carthage, remembered silence. But memory had taught them that eradication created martyrs, not lessons. Instead, humanity chose exposure. Every intercepted transmission was declassified and released. Every secret agreement made public. Worlds courted by the remnants saw the cost clearly. Restored privilege for a few, subjugation for the many. Support evaporated, leaving the remnants isolated and furious. Desperation breeds escalation. The remnants struck back not with fleets but with terror. Sabotage teams attacked hyperlane stabilizers. Refugee convoys were targeted. Cooperative hubs bombed. The message was simple. If the old order could not rule, it would burn the new one down. Civilian deaths mounted. Outrage surged across human space. Calls for decisive action grew louder. Restraint began to crack under grief. The attack on Helios Gate changed everything. A massive transit nexus crowded with civilian traffic, sabotaged during peak cycle. Millions died as ships collided and fell into unstable space. The perpetrators broadcast a manifesto invoking ancient authority and necessary sacrifice. The echo of council language was unmistakable. Humanity snapped again, but this time not into clarity, into resolve. A galaxy-wide emergency session convened, not dominated by humanity, but chaired by a rotating council including species once ignored entirely. The vote was nearly unanimous. The remnants would be dismantled permanently, not negotiated with, not tolerated. The action would be collective, transparent, and final. The campaign was swift, precise, and relentless. Coalition fleets isolated remnant systems, cut off resources, jammed communications, and deployed boarding teams rather than bombardment. Ancient strongholds fell one by one, their defenders stunned by opposition that did not seek glory or vengeance. Leaders were arrested, tried in public tribunals, their crimes laid bare. Not just recent atrocities but centuries of systemic violence, forced sterilizations, engineered famines, erased cultures. History was unsealed. For many species, the trials were shattering. Truths long dismissed as rumors confirmed, atrocities recontextualized as policy. The myth of benevolent stewardship collapsed completely. Even those who had benefited from the old order struggled to defend it. When the final remnant world surrendered, there was no celebration, only exhaustion. Memorials rose across dozens of systems, names etched in hundreds of languages. Helios Gate rebuilt, not as a monument to power, but as a reminder of cost. Its central ring left scarred intentionally, never fully repaired. Humanity emerged, changed, trusted less blindly, feared more openly, respected cautiously. They had proven restraint, but also proven capacity for destruction when lines were crossed. The galaxy adjusted its calculus. Alliances became more deliberate, checks more stringent. No single species allowed unchecked authority, including humanity. Safeguards multiplied. Redundancy became doctrine. Children across human worlds learned the history not as triumph but as warning. How easily silence could be mistaken for weakness. How easily righteousness could become justification. The phrase humanity finally snapped faded from common use. Replaced by a quieter understanding, humanity learned, and forced the galaxy to learn with them. Yet beneath the new stability, something restless stirred. Beyond mapped space, beyond old council charts, signals appeared, faint at first, watching, listening. A civilization older than the council, older than most memory. Noticing the sudden absence of a familiar hierarchy, the galaxy had survived its reckoning, but it had also announced itself, loudly, to whatever waited in the dark. The Watchers in the dark did not announce themselves with fleets or ultimatums. They did not need to. Their presence was felt in the way long-range sensors returned echoes that did not match known physics, in the way probes vanished without debris, in the way ancient star maps recovered from council vaults suddenly made sense. Annotations once dismissed as myth, now aligning with modern anomalies. The galaxy realized with a cold shared breath that the council had not been the apex of history, only a layer built atop something far older. For the first time since the fall, fear spread faster than politics, not panic, but awareness, the kind that sharpens thought and strips away vanity. Emergency forums convened across the cooperative network. Scientists, historians, tacticians, philosophers, voices that had rarely shared a table now forced into proximity. Humanity listened more than it spoke, remembering too well the cost of assuming leadership meant answers. Fragments of data were assembled, a picture emerging slowly. The council had not unified the galaxy out of wisdom, but out of fear. Long ago it had encountered something vast and patient beyond the rim, a civilization that did not conquer territory, but curated species, allowing them to rise, fragment, collapse, studying the cycles, intervening only when an order became too stagnant or too unpredictable. The council had positioned itself as a buffer, believing that rigid hierarchy would make the galaxy legible, manageable, uninteresting to the Watchers. And now that hierarchy was gone. The question that haunted every chamber was simple. Had humanity saved the galaxy, or exposed it? Signals intensified, not messages, not language, but patterns, stars, subtly repositioned, energy flows, redirected on cosmic scales, unmistakable signs of engineering beyond any known capability. Some species argued for immediate militarization, others for concealment, still others for surrender to inevitability. Humanity heard echoes of the council in every argument, fear seeking comfort in control. What tipped the balance was not strategy, but humility. A proposal from a minor species once ignored entirely, a species whose biology made long-term pattern recognition intuitive. They suggested that the Watchers were not predators, nor gods, but archivists, observers of complexity, and that what drew their attention was not power, but rigidity, civilizations that stopped changing, stopped arguing, stopped choosing. The Council had frozen the galaxy into a predictable shape. Humanity had shattered that shape, and in doing so created noise, variation, life. Humanity supported the proposal, not because it was comforting, but because it aligned with everything they had learned the hard way. The galaxy did not need a shield. It needed motion, adaptability, redundancy. No single system, no single authority, no single narrative. The cooperative network was expanded, not centralized. Decision-making deliberately messy. Regional autonomy strengthened. Alliances overlapping rather than nested. Power dispersed so completely that no single failure could define the whole. Preparations were made not for war, but for resilience. Shared research initiatives, distributed archives, mobile populations, species encouraged to diversify habitats and cultures rather than standardize. Humanity opened its own darkest archives. Weapons designs, failure analysis, ethical collapses, trusting that transparency was less dangerous than secrecy. When contact finally came, it was anticlimactic by legend standards. No towering entities, no divine proclamations. A single construct appearing at the edge of cooperative space, vast but inert, emitting a simple repeating structure that translated not into words but into a question. Are you still becoming? The answer was not given by humanity alone, nor by any council, but by action. 100 simultaneous choices, trade routes rerouted, debates held openly, conflicts resolved imperfectly, cultures diverging wildly rather than converging. The galaxy refused to settle, refused to crystallize, refused to present a single face. The construct lingered, observed, adjusted its parameters, and then slowly withdrew. Not gone, but satisfied. The Watchers receded back into myth, not defeated, not appeased, simply no longer interested in the aftermath. There was no relief parade, no final chapter, just work, generations of it. Humanity faded slightly from the center, intentionally, sharing influence, stepping back when others stepped forward, remembered not as rulers but as catalysts. The species that broke a silence, and then refused to replace it with another. The ruins of the old council chamber still floated in its orbit, preserved as a cautionary relic. School groups from dozens of species visited, standing where Elias Rowan once stood, learning how power could rot when insulated from consequence. His name restored in some histories, omitted in others, fitting for a moment that belonged to more than one person. New Carthage remained uninhabited, a quiet planet under permanent protection. Its memorial beacons still shining, not as accusation, but as anchor, a reminder of the cost of patience without dignity. And when future civilizations rose and fell, when new species reached for the stars with hope and fear intertwined, the galaxy did not offer them a throne or a leash, only a truth earned through pain. No one would decide their place for them, and no silence would be mistaken for consent again. Humanity did not erase the Galactic Council from history. History erased it when it could no longer explain the present. And in the vast moving complexity that followed, the galaxy remained alive, unfinished, and free.